So a quick continuation here. Yeah, it seemed to be like whether or not if continuation of getting back into the student loan thing here. Seems to be whether or not if I'm gonna have to think about whether or not if some good circulation and and blood flow is maybe the thought of maybe not a remote control deal, the Surgeon General, but hey. In any case, yeah, so like might as well include that and jump right into the thing about it, and don't be shy thing, right? So in any case, the student loan seems to be like whether or not if identifying the thought of like a forbearance would present maybe the thought of like the not a penalty issue like forbearance provides, or the thought of like leading the way with innovation, like technologically advanced, and what the forbearance really represents. I mean, if the forbearance would only present maybe the thought of what auditing would only mean as an introductory preface, and considering maybe not necessarily a penalty based upon content or experience, or maybe the thought of maybe a preview in a way like a forbearance might suggest, as compared to the thought of the combine of a Pell Grant. The thing about the GI Bill as compared to a Pell Grant, if it's ultimately getting to whether if while litigation is not de facto, or memory minus de facto is like 35, and like the state capital and Interstate Highway 35 in Austin. And what Austin is to the thought of like a state and states, and Austin being 84 as compared to like a state being plural with an S, being like the thing about 84. It seemed to be really whether or not if state is going to be like 65, or the thought of like the pronunciation of like YouTube as maybe initial, or not necessarily abbreviation, or even an acronym, or of YT. YT being like the alphanumeric of 45, yet pronunciation like white, or Wyatt Earthling, yeah. And it's kind of like YouTube. You got to be kidding me. It's kind of like the YouTube is kind of like you being 61 in the news and the miracle, huh? Or the alphanumeric 190 governor, and all that stuff about the 213 area code of Los Angeles being 109, and all that stuff, right? So in any case, yeah, so like it's ultimately getting to the thought whether of the thought of like 1995 would only be some thought of a cumulative rollover that would present maybe the thought of like COVID-19 representing maybe some thought of a cumulative rollover based upon the thought of the new millennium in the way of like the categorization of money. I mean, if it's ultimately getting to, well, like, once again, a method of banking, or what COVID-19 is to the alphanumeric of 72, or money itself being 72, or brown representing, some thought of like all that white stuff, like you got all the right stuff, like beyond, you're an astronaut, really, right? You must have been baptized during the gold rush, right? You were on a stagecoach, right? Yeah. All that, that hop-sing amphibious, J. Edgar Hoover amphibious stuff about the platform on the stagecoach, and all that VSAT communications, canvassing the halo schematic ecclesiast, beyond the absentee of the ecclesiastes, yeah, canvassing the VSAT schematic halo, yeah, the thing beyond the religious thought of like the ecclesiast, canvassing the ecclesiast thing about the the platform, and the VSAT thing about it, and all that good stuff about it. Well, anyway, so likewise, it seemed to be like the forbearance presents maybe the issue of like some idea that it's not a penalty. Does it present the same issue of like an FDIC claim? I mean, is it considered protecting a patent, or a patent pending, or maybe just a claim of only maybe what litigation might only mean to a writ of habeas corpus? I mean, ultimately, I mean, is it really the thought of a student loan and the principles of that and SSI in combination with like, SNAP food benefits and the Lone Star card as compared to what a living quarter might only mean as a fixture in real estate, in the way of like the thought of SNAP food benefits being something of you know, the thought of like some combine between SNP food benefits and the Lone Star card as compared to EBT, which would almost be like EBT would present the forbearance of, you know, the difference between a Texas Guaranteed Student Loan or what a grant is. Or, you know, why litigation is not necessarily de facto, yet it presents the issue of like whether or not if a writ of habeas corpus is and not a normal thought of how law is practiced. You know, I mean, just by turning the, you know, the K television, K radio on, you know, or I mean, you know, really, you know, what's the deal with like, you know, W television and W radio and that W2 stuff? You know, and, you know, I still see, you know, the thing about the Philadelphia Fox 29 News. I mean, you know, it represents Philadelphia and think about the 4th of July and Independence Day and 200-year celebration, you know. It still seems to be, you know, the deal of some idea of like space exploration and, you know, some idea of like, you know, Ford Aerospace be some like Oxford, you know, university deal about, you know, it's kind of like a, you know, when you see a mountain climb, it's like, have you driven to Oxford, you know, university, you know, landscaping idea, you know, a portrait of landscape. And, you know, if you see a mountain climate or some idea of some like color code of some oxen and Sarbanes and Oxley or raising a bar, you know, some idea of like a beyond the baritone and raising a bar or, you know, beyond the Sarbanes or some Baines idea of like a, tonal chasm, some Baines tonal chasm between, you know, the three. It seemed to be like between the thought of like the perception of maybe suggesting maybe anticipating sarcasm as compared to, you know, the tonal quality of raising a bar or the baritone, until all that, you know, grander tenor stuff about you know, the grand opening, yeah, and you know, the Sarbanes and Oxley presents, you know, in my mind, just based on pronunciation, color code, and you know what, you know, Ford Aerospace seems to be to like you know, if you see a mountain climate or, you know, if it's ultimately getting to an agronomist or agriculture or the thought of an aggregate or, I mean, what the real deal is to like a local area network, that way of internet protocol presenting whether or not if even an aggregate only represents a neighborhood or a non-agreed issue once again of a neighborhood, predominantly not necessarily a commercial venue, based on what a fixture in real estate means in as far as like a living quarter goes. Like I see the thing like in like a grocery store as EBT, the information being provided in a way, you know, and I just want to, you know, kind of look back a little bit and you know, say that this is a continuation, which presents an issue sometimes of yeah, and it's really not amusing to me having to break up some of this content instead of having, you know. Anyway, you know, I had to take a brief moment there, and but anyway, yeah, this is a continuation of the one right before, involving some of the information. But it seems to be like where the forbearance is presenting the issue of like, you know, why the Fifth Amendment is not a non-profit organization. I mean, if it really presents the issue of the axis, the three intersecting axes of Audi, or what LexisNexis is by comparison to like Westlaw, and some interchangeability between, you know, I wouldn't even call it cross-referencing, but interchangeable based upon compatibility or practical application of Alpha-American linguistics of like a pi r squared of exponents of addition as compared to exponential quotients of powers of multiplication, you know, beyond the executive classroom, and what that is going through the circuit and all that integration and compatibility of like principle, you know, and you know, beyond the thought of like principality into the power side of, you know, the way I even see like what Data Foundry presented as information in the beginning when I first started looking for like, you know, international financial management and, you know, the word globalization, predominantly the thing about even, you know, the quadrants of like the globe and spherical quadrants of a two-dimensional flat plane surface of just like the world globe on a map, presenting that football shape, or, you know, if it just, you know, needs to be the thought of like a degreed level of consensual, irreparable standards of consensual participation, that word relation between architecture and platform, or, you know, the thought of, you know, meeting the requirements and likewise having to think about embedding encryption that way, and, you know, what availability means to all that stuff, and whether or not if the equator is going to be, you know, some idea of like you know, some real brains below the equator, okay, in relation, okay. In any case, yeah, so like, yeah, so, in that way, it seems to be like whether or not if forbearance is really going to represent, you know, some thought of like what auditing would mean to legal meeting and deposition as compared to the thought of a domestically clause factor of like whether or not if proclamations to declaration would only be involving like a major city municipality in a way of, you know, some idea of what annuity is as compared to taxation or itemization in a way, or in any case, yeah, or the thought of like whether or not the ratified and codified only represents some like some old time stuff of what only human capital might not necessarily be disregarded as a storage area network. Although the acronym SAN software presents the thought of storage area network, like warehousing would present in international import and exporting. Yet at the same time, does it present, you know, some idea of like degree level of like a human capital is really the big deal, and the issue about, you know, the color code of like a world history involving the pest, green, and province, as compared to the book of jurisprudence with the black back. I mean, it's obviously the biggest part about it. The acronym of SAN software, International Financial Management, if it's going to be Securities and Annuities Network, or some idea of storage area network, or what's on or offshore based on commerce dictating what's on or offshore based on, if it's ultimately getting to an FDIC claim of like a patent pending, or maybe a projected estimate option in future of what only a protected issue of like U.S. patents would only be, not necessarily the thought of patent pending representing maybe a copyright, or non-negotiable non-transferable itemization based upon a projected estimate of whether knowing or not knowing is ultimately really the deal about it, right? Or, you know, thought of like a intellectual being used as third person, or an easement in a way of like international law that would provide, you know, some value based upon participation, or the memory like at this very second that you're watching, right, and listening to on YouTube, not limited to, you know, why not include, you know, the thought of like you know, the thought of like, hey, is a star really born? Although, I mean, if born is really a B or N, or maybe the thought of like only what Geneva, Switzerland is to the B in venue as compared to the summit meetings, or the thought of like a prepaid postage, you know, beyond Calamity Jane, in the way of like you were baptized there in the gold rush, weren't you? Yeah, you were on a stagecoach, right? Yeah, sure. Yeah, so in any case, yeah, so like this is the year 2023, okay? And it ultimately gets to whether or not if the student loan and the principles of all that information and by comparison, the EBT over the, you know, the thing about the SNAP food benefits and the Lone Star card. I mean, it presents an issue like a forbearance would present to a Texas guaranteed student loan, and combined with like a Pell Grant. I mean, it seems to be like a Mercedes-Benz 3-point thing about even the Delta Force, and why my thought about the Westlaw search engines involving Westlaw and international law that way present the thought of the Delta Force being like a misappropriation allocation of the Mississippi, the biggest mouth of the river, identified as a delta, identified in schematics of electrical and electronic, predominantly more so of electronic, as a triangle, predominantly more of electronic and attenuation of waveform beyond, the normal standard thought of like measuring cycles per second oscillation of like bandwidth and spectrum that would normally be, the max capacity of like a 13-band graphic equalizer. And that way yet presents the pastel green and red of night vision. Is the big deal about the nano units. And that way the pastel green and red is the only two that seems to be the significance of like when and where the 13-band graphic equalizer being involved with that are the colors of the night vision itself, involving, the VSAT information involving the KU band, identifying like KU band, and my thought, which K television, K radio is, to W television and W, and what a W2 form might maybe be of PG-13 rating, or presidential governors, 13, thought about, 13 being 99, or all that stuff about the telepathic, and the TP being 36, or chase, or telepathic being 99, and the alphanumerics of the word itself, numerical value and alphanumerics of like the number 13 itself, and you know what that is over the eagle as compared to, you know, Austin Powers Bluebonnet Imperial Eagle, and how that's like in my mind, you know, the thought of prepaid postage of like Calamity Jane and Geneva, Switzerland, involving summit meetings in the BN venue, which ultimately seems to be the deal about human capital and human investment, or prepaid postage as an on-demand. I mean, if it's ultimately getting to the thought of like playing horizons of import and exporting, supply and demand, or, you know, like the thought of presentation, you know, the lobbying strategy, the approach, the presentation, the delivery, or, you know, what prepaid postage is. You know, I mean, if it's ultimately getting to the thought of like Abraham Lincoln night vision and what the rectangle is to, you know, high-rise buildings and buildings that would normally be only available as information on television and world news, national news and local news. Yeah, well, there it is. Okay, something about the summit meetings in Geneva, Switzerland, and in the BN venue, and something that I'm still looking at, and yeah, and another place in the Galleria area in the Houston, Texas area, involving only 2 rectangles, which seems to be somewhere in coordination of 2 places of like the interview where the front lines of the beach road seems to be the big deal about reading the information at the interview, and anyone, you know, like once again, it seems to be like the big deal about the front lines of the beach road, and you know, like 2 invisible people, you know, walking on and 4 feet, and 2 sets of footprints being like 4 feet, and then the questions like the big deal about the front lines of the beach road, like the Christian thing about the picture with the footprints on the beach road, but that is the information. Not limited to, sometimes identified as footprint and or, you know, including, you know, carbon footprint and other factors involving, you know, a lot of stuff, and including even the acronym EPA as compared to, you know, electronic power as compared to what would be maybe the thought of like a environmental protection agency, the EPA being 41 in the USA, and the alphanumerics of like, you know, home, and you know what that is to like you know, alphanumerics being 140 in Pearland, Texas, or attenuation, or the absolute salute of the UA thing. You know, attenuation with the U and A taken out is like the attention. It's like the pi r squared salute. The pi r squared, yeah, like the radius with one salute thing about it, yeah. Or as compared to the exponential quotients of powers of multiplication. And all that good stuff about it. But likewise, it seems to be like, ultimately, it gets to the thought of whether or not it's a combine of the EBT, the electronic benefits transfer, my thought of E equal MC squared, and, you know, the English Parliament, you know, just identifying the English language that way, or, you know, the thought of like the euro dollar and the European thing about the thing about the 7 nations, or, you know, the 7 thought, the pylon looking like TP thing about the even the 7 layers of the atmosphere, in a way of what the ionosphere is as the outer layer of the atmosphere. And it seems to be the big deal about the ionosphere before like entering outer space and space exploration. What Oxford University seems to be of like when you see a mountain climate, you know, have you driven a Ford Oxford University Aerospace, or clumping on the thought of like the arrowhead jet formation and flight patterns of you know, the arrowhead, or some idea of some nativity point of origin of the Native American Indian way of an arrowhead, or, you know, some Oxford deal of Sarbanes and Oxley representing, you know, some idea of like labor and the color code of being black of an ox, and Sarbanes and Oxley thing about raising a bar, and, you know, beyond a baritone, and all that stuff. Well, anyway, likewise, anyway, I was wanting to include this once again real quick. It's already going on like 19 minutes, and I'm probably going to do it again and like get it all in one video, and hopefully I won't be experiencing like VSAT, you know, communications, you know, affecting, you know, the need to like suggest maybe taking a break. But anyway, yeah. So like, anyway, you know, I was thinking about, hey, that, you know, the Lexus. And the reason why I focused on this is because I was thinking about, you know, the Smart for Two smart car, and Mercedes-Benz, you know, being a distributor of that, likewise in the ScionIQ200ZionNewMillennium and the Saturn Sky, like a smaller version of the Corvette. Yet Saturn Sky presents the, you know, the ring deal, colors of a rainbow, and international electronic engineering thing about the color codes, and my thought about the 180 identical twin, like rainbow thing about the, it seems to be like involving like a television program involving, you know, the Permian Basin. Seems to be the deal about my thought of like some idea of like a, for purple mountains majesty above the fruited plains of America. Not limited to, but it seems to be like, you know, the thing about the Alpha of 200 in Fort Stockton, Texas, and Hector. It seems to be like the deal between like Qatar Airline and Emirate Airline. It seems to be like the Alpha 71 and some idea of like a WadeA International as compared to, you know, like a drummer and the waveform or conductivity or the conductor or the semiconductor in a way of like a, you know, waveform of like an orchestration and as well as like a 180 of like a normal double bass drummer. It's like 180, you know, from left to right, side to side, like a straight line being 180 degrees anyway. In any case, so like it seems to be like getting, you know, beyond the thought of like a measuring cycles per second oscillation into the waveform. And in 90 degree, what would be presented as like a vertical absolute value, like, you know, going through algebra and through calculus on into quantum, it seems to be like the difference of, you know, the 90 degree of the absolute values being horizontal, like the Israeli flag and the code blue thing about the delta force and the, you know, 3-point, you know, triangle being, you know, the 6-point star and the code blue thing about the Israeli flag and all that pastel stuff and you know, all that religious stuff and involving, you know, the Christianity and the 3-day thing about the resurrection and then going to Mount Olives, like the plateau, seemed to be the deal about going to Mount Olives after the Lord Jesus Christ had resurrected and on his way to Mount Olives. Seemed to be the big deal about the plateau and somewhere in my mind, you know, beyond, you know, Moses in the mountain, like getting the 10 Commandments right, on some idea of like some flat plane surface, like a plateau is in a mountain, or, you know, the thought of like a even second coming to Christ, you know, being like the thing about levitation and some idea of levitation that way, but or a level of a platform. My mind something about a plateau and a mountain in that way. Even at Mount Olives and Thessalonians in the word transfiguration, yeah, about the after the third day resurrecting and going to it, but it seemed to be like the big deal about the 3, and, you know, 3 being the numerical of 3 and the alphanumeric 56. And it's also getting to the paper mate, once again, the 56 is 10. It's getting to the idea of like Roe v. Wade and the word predominantly suggested as abortion. Yet, you know, it's like, hey, you saw Roe v. Wade on the news. News being 61, like the thought of a Rose being spelled with a R-O-W-E. By comparison, you know, some idea, the difference between adoption and abortion, it gives the alphanumeric appearances of equality, yet in meaning it's not necessarily the same. Yet abortion and adoption is alphanumerically 94, like 56 is 10, and some idea in combination of pronunciation, alphanumeric, and linguistics of like paper mate beyond, you know, an idea of like whether isometrics is really the big deal about knowing the difference beyond, you know, a normal daily standard transaction that might only present maybe a degree level of rep standards of consensual participation like the North American Free Trade Act and a daily standard transaction at the bank, based upon, you know, whether or not if a requirement of the thought of earning is not necessarily anything other than maybe potentially having fair use of the easement in the way of like maybe what only management might mean to the North American Free Trade Act, or the thought of maybe even NATO in a way of like what circuit is, of like a monetary domestic gross national product in a way of aggregates, or, you know, some idea of like prepaid postage beyond Calamity Jane and the stagecoach of like you know, some idea like being born during the gold rush, or some idea like leaving the Golden Gate, so like some idea of TDCJ into some idea of like some golden interior with red carpet of pi r squared of not limited to 9-hole golf courses, obviously, and color code of like what Russia and Prussia is to world history during some idea of like a quadrant being 3-month period of like a year being a quadrant would be, you know, the thought of like 3 months before Richard Nixon, during Richard Nixon, and like a quadrant, like representative of the hood ornament of Abraham Lincoln night vision on the tennis court being a quadrant of a rectangle, likewise like a quarter in the way of, you know, what a quadrant and a quarter is, quarter being an alphanumeric of 100, and what 100 is to the century, or, you know, a thought of like hospitality, and what it means, you know, to like a Y2K, terminology beyond, new millennium, like a cumulative rollover, like what COVID-19 only provides as a categorization of the alphanumerics of like 92, or world news being like a money miracle, or the idea that it's not dormant or insignificant as a forfeiture, or disregard or insignificance of whether a yay or nay only represents maybe, some idea of like some huge secret of like every neighborhood. That's compared to like, what a commercial venue, like whether or not there's a medical power of attorney, and what a fixture in real estate only determines whether if it's a real estate or a commercial venue of living quarters, as compared to like, hey, beyond the toilet, there's some idea of like a grocery shopping in a commercial venue. The EBT thing seems to be providing like the, easement as a fixture. And if it just has to be some idea of like dimensionally clause, access is intellectual, what duration only means while doing there and being there, would be maybe the thought of like living in a living quarter, a commercial venue living quarter. That's not a question. That's 24/7, 365 a year, or, the one day like leap year. In any case, so it's like it ultimately gets to like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, if it's ultimately getting to, what's on television in a grocery store, or, some idea of like Roger Houston, or like some idea of like Kroger, maybe only being the thought of like whether a KU band would only present maybe, the Roger Houston thing of like a NASA, or, hey, you got all the right stuff. Yeah, like you must be an astronaut. You must have been baptized like during the Gold Rush, right? You were on Stagecoach, weren't you? Somewhere in We International, like some waveform, some conduct report, right? Huh. Somewhere between Sarbanes and Oxley, all that, raising the ball with GMC, and GMC being 23, the year 2023, hey, all right. We got it going on now, huh? And some like current affair, and some idea of like relation, right? We got it going on, right? So like, GMC raising the bar, some like thought of like military grade, or some I-beam thing about the what commercial venues are normally built with the I-beams, as compared to, the thought of like residential, or what residency only means a Club Med, and, hospitality in a hospital, or some idea of the circuit that presents maybe the issue of like duration, given the appearance of like a willingness and all that's nice anyway, right? So anyway, yeah, like, if there's a grade to be made, or have something to say about it, well, would that be the anticipation of maybe, I mean, would it be the Sarbanes and Oxley, like, have you driven to Oxford University, thing about the color code, and as someone in some like space exploration, have you driven a Ford Aerospace, 9 degree of like a portrait of a landscape, or beyond the Yellow Brick Road, or some idea of like Elton John, and some idea of like even the thought of like what seems to be like whether or not they've gone beyond the Department of Public Safety of like four-wheel transportation and getting into the pilot. What towing might only mean is maritime law, even, making a grade beyond internet protocol of a local area network, in my mind, some idea of like a still, whether or not if amphibious participation would only be the J. Edgar Hoover thing, beyond, thoughts of Wyatt Earp and John Wayne, and the Hopsing thing about, really, it's ultimately, thought about the walk, the jaywalk, and the amphibious thing about J. Edgar Hoover seemed to be so very much about my thing about thinking about We International being 181 Houston, Texas electronic power, and ultimately the thing of like Pearland, Texas, we just like the alphanumerics of 41 with the acronym of like USA or home applied to alphanumerics, and attenuation, and a Purple Heart, Holy Miracles, and home, and all that stuff about the alphanumerics of 181 in Houston, Texas electronic power, and We International. I mean, if it's ultimately getting to the thought of like once again, it seemed to be like the deal, and really, I'm getting back to the LexisNexis, and what the search engine is to like LexisNexis. It seemed like an integrating, interchangeable compatibility between LexisNexis and like Westlaw, because my thought of like Westlaw involving international law. I was getting Westlaw, somehow, like, on my laptop. I just, was, trying to get it anyway. But, I mean, I got it for free with international law. And, I mean, when a person really is reading international law, I mean, it's sometimes so straightforward. I mean, it doesn't, really present the issue, of having a need for, cross-referencing, or a situation, or conditions that would maybe present the need to, present other factors. But international laws seem to be like so straightforward, not in need of like a cross-referencing. And before, like any thought of like a situation or condition or some idea of like integrating factors of like what jurisprudence might only mean to color code with a black bag as compared to the province. I mean, if Zion is ultimately the idea of like a HTTP:// involving computer programming and computer language, is it ultimately getting to the principles of like a forbearance presenting the issue? What would normally be the thought of like in my mind, somewhere of auditing legal media and deposition. Forbearance presenting, normally when forbearance is involved with a student loan, it presents the issue. It's not a penalty. And kind of like sets it as not necessarily a storage file or an archive or the word freezing or not really forfeiture. I mean, if it just has to be the thought of like I don't even want to say anything other than maybe legal media and deposition as compared to proclamations or declarations. Or, once again, it seems to be presenting the deal of even EBT involving like SNAP food benefits and the Lone Star card involving supplemental security. And the whole idea of like all that information there is the practical application of principle and integration and all that stuff. I mean, it's like it's all there. Of a student loan and SSI supplemental and the food stamps, the EBT, living quarters, fixtures in real estate, what a medical power of attorney is, having use of like a fixture, whether it's real estate or commercial venue, or what a television is or is not based upon programming or preference that way, or, the thought of the principle of an easement itself, or, going beyond the thought of like some 8 ohms issue of like perfect 10/10 vision, ultimately getting to the zoom lens of like the planetarium, some exponential quotients of powers of multiplication, and the planetarium, like perfect 10/10 vision, is ultimately the figure 8 ice skating thing on the zoom lens that way. And that's really kind of like what I'm referring to. Something in my mind like a Barbara Walters and Hugh Downs on 2020 presenting, the thought of like a normal, mandatory idea of like like really good average vision in that way. Yeah, Barbara Walters, it kind of like had her own television series like The View. And it seemed to be like all this stuff that like where I'm at, it seems like all the geniuses, of psychology and alphanumerics. I mean, it's like I was born in like 1964 and like this year 2023 and realizing so much. So many, it seemed like so many degree levels of like participation. I mean, it's like noticing and recognizing how very much, the anticipation like of this year, it seemed to be like the GMC thing about raising the bar, making a grade thing, and where like the projected estimate of like where it should be at this time, this like year 2023, it seems to be like, really it for real. It's like even recognizing or any significance that would have maybe not necessarily the thought of bar was terminology of international financial management or globalization. Thinking of making a grade beyond the toilet, or the high-O silver. Think about, the oldest governmental computer mainframe being a Whopper or some Israeli bird. See, the thing about the Israeli bird, the whoopa, it's a blue and purple bird, okay? And it's blue and purple is like alphanumeric 128. And all this information, it seems to be equating to a misappropriation of allocation of Mississippi and getting to the Delta Force, okay? And delta being a schematic of a triangle and what it is to the U.S. dollar and the pyramid and why one pronoun, 4 types of pronouns cannot be used as a subject. And it's ultimately even getting to, the idea of RCA and a mascot of, the phonograph and the deal about the God or, what's the deal about the CEO or in God or the Z26 thing. And the in God we trust, you got to be kidding me. Or is it like the CEO God, or is it like really the RCA deal about? Is it the FDIC claim based upon programming, or is it just like landscaping? Why one pronoun cannot be used as a subject? You got to be kidding me. It's not necessarily because of tree bark, is it? Or is it like I really don't want to say it again. I don't want to say it again, but I'm going to say it this time and leave it at that. Is it why one pronoun of the 4 types of pronouns cannot be used as a subject? Is that like a dog pissing on a tree? Or is that the in God we trust based on, what the idea of like some ergonomic value of accuracy and who it ultimately really means to, the neighborhood, or is it the neighborhood thought of like innovation leading the way, or some surface to air like, hey, really, or some idea of like rocket science, you know, at NASA, and you know, space shuttle, or some like satellite communications communication involving, you know, VSAT in that way, because it seems to be like the KU band is ultimately getting to like the idea of like information involving VSAT and satellite communications in the KU band. And ultimately, it's getting to whether or not at Fox 29 News is really going to be the issue, or some single difference between isometric value of like some idea of like the 100 Club, Benjamin Franklin, that keynote that's so prevalent in like the United States Supreme Court of like search engines, and whether if research is only the thought of like, you know, a non-degreed issue of terminology based upon distribution of information. I mean, even on world news, okay, what a local area network might get the pretense might only be, you know, a segregated thought of like non-negotiable, non-degreed information, even on world news, even in the Supreme Court, okay. I mean, for real, okay, and ultimately, you know, what is led to be believed is the standard, maybe naive to the fact of programming on television. I mean, so very much, yeah. And in any case, so like it seemed to be ultimately getting to like the thought of the keynote in Benjamin Franklin, the thing about I believe it was at night that Benjamin Franklin, it was like flying the kite about electricity, and some idea of like even Einstein, and E equal MC squared, and it's ultimately getting to, you know, the Apple iPhone SE, and pronunciation being the thing about language, and yes, and pronunciation, the vision of C, between the Aries statute once again, and the IRA and the color code, the Air Force One, the President of the United States, you know, presenting the colors of like the 1040EZ, which is predominantly the thing about an IRA as compared to some history of the television screen presenting, you know, the color of like a midnight blue in combination. I think it's with and without the color code of like the 1040EZ, the colors of the Air Force One, you know, President of the United States jet, you know. But yeah, there was a time that it seemed to be, I mean, if it's ultimately getting to an intellectual duration of only what going through the circuit means, or the thought of Deep Star 6 I compared to the code blue, the Israeli flag, or what Israel is to the alphanumerics 73, Egypt and Harris in the US dollar, or the delta presenting that schematic as a triangle, or maybe even the thought of why one pronoun of the four types of pronouns cannot be used as a subject, is because it's really the thought of a pi squared, ultimately getting to, I mean, if it's the thought of like above the equator, or degree level of reputable centers, of like ultimately, you know, the thought of code blue and the 6-point star of the Israeli flag, or the 90 degree of the absolute values, in algebra going through calculus into quantum at a 90 degree representative of like the horizontal lines above and below the 6-point star of the Israeli flag, or ultimately the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 Federal Reserve Banks representing the US dollar, or what that is, and VSAT communications, even with like even comptrolling regulated, and somewhere in my mind, like comptrolling having some idea in my mind of like maybe some thought of a regulatory, I mean, if the word is commission, or like some idea of like rules and guidelines, or governance in a way of like allowing other monies, circuits, and currencies, and database administration, network operations have fair use of the US dollar, or what that is to international law of having fair use seems to be like the big deal of intellectual easements, like a compact disc, a DVD, or entertainment, or educational, and the memory, and the meaning and the value of the content as a standard that, you know, people normally choose for themselves, and whether or not if that's being provided as maybe a standard, you know, beyond, you know, entertainment, and all the practice makes perfect, you know, beyond the hype, I mean, for real, and you know, whether or not if a breach of, I mean, if it's ultimately getting to like a U.S. patent, or the thought of like a copyright and trademark, I mean, if it's ultimately getting to whether or not if a writ of habeas corpus is the idea of like litigation, why litigation, not necessarily de facto, ultimately, you know, the memory minus de facto seems to be the deal about the NASA and space exploration, and even the thought of like Dodge using, on the charger, I think is the only one that I know of, using the double forward slash on the charger at a specific time, like of HTTP : double forward slash, and what the colon is, you know, to Austin Powers, in that way of like, you know, the Blue Planet Imperial Legal, and I can't believe it's butter, but, you know, hey, in any case, yeah, so, yeah, for real, or the Abraham Lincoln thing about, somewhere in my mind, the Iowa caucus, presenting that Iowa and the Euro and my thought of like, you know, something about Abraham Lincoln, the night vision thing about New Bags, Iowa, and what that is, you know, it's like you got all the right stuff, right? You know, beyond you know, all that white stuff on a halo venue, some color code of the toilet, and the high silver thing. Getting to the oldest governmental computer mainframe called a Whopper, and the pronunciation, I mean, it's almost like AOL, the oblation and ablation, and the pericardium. It's hopefully getting to, you know, the deal about escrow and heart god and alphanumerics is 78, and quite a bit that I've been mentioning, and it's like it all seems to be so like a miracle god, and somewhere between the truth and 87, the exact opposite of 78, getting to escrow and the idea of the same of the word pocket, and how pool table, it's ultimately like the three thing seemed to be the big deal about whether or not the Mercedes-Benz and the thought of like 3-6 pocket deal about the pool table equating to 18, representing some like Audi axis in a way of like what 2 9-hole golf courses only represent is pi r squared. What maybe intersecting axes would only maybe represent of Audi of like an alignment parallel universe as compared to a World Series. Even international electronic engineering in that way of like you've probably seen it in schematics and know about, you know, where it's 1, 2, or 3 phase or a parallel circuit as compared to a series, or you know, the thought of like an alignment of parallel universe, you know, beyond Y2K is like, hey, it's good seeing you. An alignment of parallel universe or some like idea of like, you know, Y2K. Why? Well, yeah. Or is it a Fielder's choice? Yeah. Hey, all right. Yeah. So anyway, so like, you know, I mean, it's ultimately getting to the word relation between architecture and platform or some idea of an equator. In any case, you know, like I'm looking at all that. But anyway, like, I was wanting to include that because my thought of like the smart car and Mercedes-Benz and the ScionIQ and the thing about the Saturn sky. I mean, you know, I'd mentioned it before about the Permian Basin. I mean, if it's ultimately getting to the thought of a plateau, or the thought of like the alphanumerics of James Lanall unit, or some idea of like geoprism is geoprison, spelt with a Z, and when, you know, like once again, when the alphabet is reversed, and M and N are the 2 center point, 2 letters in the center, and when it's like reversed, it's like a M is N is M, 13 is 14, 14 is 13, like equates to 55, and you know, all that stuff about heaven and in the sky thing, okay? So like anyway, so like with that being said, I mean, like if it's ultimately getting to whether or not it's litigation or why the Fifth Amendment is not a non-profit organization, well, you know, it would have to be the thought of like prism being spelt with a Z and the M is in geoprism, you know, the Chevrolet geoprism, representing, you know, the nanoluminance of density of like a rainbow, and the colors of the electronic engineering. But the Fort Stockton, Texas actor thing, it seemed to be like back through the sector, like guitar, seemed to be like the deal about the thing about the guitar and Amerit, and in a way of like you know what it is to some idea of the jet stream. In any case, or what waveform even looks like in that way. Yeah, so like it seemed to be like the thought of like it seemed to be the guitar sector. Some people pronounce it differently, but it seemed to be like a Rush song. And why Rush with like Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson, and Neil Peart? You know, I normally pronounce Neil Peart. I've heard he himself say his last name's pronounced Peart. In any case, it's almost like a Pierce elevated down I-45 around the Houston area. But in any case, yeah, so like the thing about the world history and world class and identifying, you know, in world history, like the pastel green being, you know, the color of the province. My thought of like even this color's sprite once again. But the deal about it seemed to be like the Rush, the rock band. It seemed to be like something about the world history and world class of like during the Richard Nixon before and after thing of like 3-month period being like representative of a quadrant, a 3-month period before and after. And likewise, in addition, you know, the during thing. But in any case, yeah, it presents that information during that time frame that would suggest maybe, I mean, if it's only an intellectual duration of a world class, I mean, you know, it seemed to be the color code identifying a pastel green as province. In my mind, automatically, you know, beyond the Garden of Eden and the golf course. I mean, it's obviously true about the golf course, is that it's some phenomenally, some of the most beautiful landscaping, like on the entire planet, for real, okay? Once again, you know, irregardless of, you know, maybe a motivation that involving everything I have to say right now. But anyway, yeah, so like, in any case, so like, in that way, it seemed to be like the jurisprudence with a black back, the colors of Sprite. I mean, so basically the difference between pastel, or what province is, to, you know, some idea of like a Zion, or the 1,000 Years of Peace, or separation between church and state, in a way of what, you know, what might only be seem to be a minimum requirement of the United States Codes annotated at a federal level. I mean, only identifying maybe, you know, the thought of like the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 Federal Reserve Banks that way as a minimum requirement, and all that red stuff about the mere words and meaning out of, you know, people's lives. And in the New Testament, it sounds like a legal media and deposition, and you know, with memory minus de facto, you know, sounds like right now. You know, not necessarily, or the thought of like the alphabetics of 247, or a Robert E. Reuben quarter, or, you know, the tribe of Reuben being some idea of like a light scribe, in a way of like isometrics, in that way of you know, the tribe of Reuben, you know, the tribe of scribes, or some light scribe issue of like a light year technologically advanced innovation, and what that is to you know, the thought of you know, light scribe in that way, or, you know, the thought of isometrics. It would be normally beyond, you know, the thought of a normal daily standard transfer in the method of banking, and going beyond. But anyway, you know, like, I'm kind of getting, you know, in a different direction. It's already going on like 46 minutes right now. But anyway, you know, like, I was thinking about that because of many factors, and what the rush is to Russia and Prussia during that time. And it seems to be like, you know, the thought of the P, and somewhere in my mind between the North American Free Trade Act, NAFTA, as compared to NATO. I mean, the only difference really seems to be the degree, what the equator is to a degree, or a 90 degree, and it seems to be the deal about the 90 degree, and what the delta force is to a misappropriation allocation of the Mississippi River, or, you know, the thought of like even Plymouth Rock. In my mind, somewhere, you know, Lee Iacocca being of Chrysler, Dodge, and Plymouth, Plymouth, Dodge, and Chrysler, like Lee Iacocca. I mean, it's the three, and there it is. It's like the Mercedes thing almost. That Plymouth Rock, the acceptance speech of the century. Lee Iacocca's acceptance speech of the century, like Plymouth Rock, right? Beyond the halo, like all that white stuff. You got all the right stuff, and all that turkey bird thing about it. So anyway, yeah, it seemed to be like some information, all the miracle and practical application. It's like it's all there. But anyway, I'm gonna have to like regroup and get my thoughts in direction, and concentrate that way. But it's getting to that point. I need to take a break anyway. But yeah, I was wanting to say something about that, because it seemed to be like the Russia-Prussia deal seemed to be the big deal about the P, and what the Soviet Union seems to be of like the Golden Gates, or, you know, not that it has to be a McDonald's deal. But if the Golden Arches of McDonald's only represent maybe the thought of maybe of you know, Nexus Lexus, or the thought of like the intersecting axis of Audi, or Westlaw. I mean, if the Golden Arches present maybe the thought of maybe the exact opposite of Westlaw, or an alignment in a parallel universe as compared to the World Series, or what Westlaw is to the Delta Force, representing maybe only one triangle, not necessarily the 6-point star, but maybe only a delta that would represent maybe a fraternity, a sorority and fraternity that way. What McDonald's Golden Arches might only mean to, you know, the Golden Gates, you know, going through the circuit of like aggregates and monetary domestic gross national product, as compared to what an international monetary fund might mean to a hedge fund, or, you know, all that stuff about the cumulative rollover, and, you know, high-end yields and returns of investment terminology and commercial paper, in the way of like a normal daily standard transaction, like the New York Stock Exchange. And, you know, I mean, you know, I can go on and on about so much information, it's unreal. But anyway, yeah, I wanted to include this because really my thought about the Diners Club, and that code blue thing about the vertical line in the center going straight up vertically in the center of like the blue circle with the vertical line in the middle of like a Diners Club seemed to be the big deal of quantum. And, you know, what a 90 degree would mean with that would present the quadrants. Likewise, you know, the EE seemed to be the deal about redundant frequency and 8 ohms of redundant frequency. Not limited to 8 ohms, I mean, there's like American Amplified involved, there's supplemental security income. There's an acronym like SSI and Superstar Intelligence, and the IS, International Space Station, International Superstar. It's like a Campbell's alphabet soup. I mean, superstars are involved, yeah, beyond Camp David in the Oval Office, okay. But in any case, that's like a. Anyway, that's what I'm really referring to in a way of like a Lexus LFSA. Yeah, let me put it over here. Gets a little bit better view of it. That's like really, I mean, that's like really cool. And I was thinking about that because of the smallest, I mean, that is most definitely got to be the best looking and most best design I've seen. I mean, it's like really cool. It's like that would be like really cool with like a SSI, for I mean, if it's ultimately getting to whether or not what benefits gives, or some thought of like transitioning or in combination. I mean, likewise, I mean for real, between like a supplemental security, providing like Medicaid and the idea of the thought of what a medical power of attorney is, having use of like a fixture, whether if real estate is only the thought of knowing whether or not if EBT it would be included as a fixture in commercial venue of living quarters is really the big deal about obviously knowing the difference of just snap through benefits and supplemental security, leading to in my mind all this information that would represent the circle, which is normally of like pi r squared using a radius, finding the diameter of a circle. Ultimately, anything normally identified involving circumference is normally anything above the surface is represented in a cylindrical form, a volume, and that seems to be the big deal about American Amplified that way. Even Fred Flintstone at pi r squared, I mean, even Fred Flintstone's transportation involving the two cylindrical wheels, life's the same. I'm moving in stereo. Life's the same except for Fred Flintstone's shoes, huh? Yeah, for real. Yeah, there it is. All that pi r squared thing about that volume at a 90-degree. That's like absolute value. Yeah, it's not so prehistoric that it rules out. The thought of JavaScript, right? Yeah. In any case, yeah. So like it really gets into So like all that stuff. I mean, I think about this stuff like all the time, and I want to have that to say because I mean, if there's some like thought of like a coverage or benefits, or thought of like some idea of like a pi r squared getting into the exponential quotients of powers of multiplication, beyond executive classroom and all the stuff about going to a circuit in Geneva, Switzerland, and the be-in venue. How true it is if it's always the be-in venue. But according to the information, it's like normally involving, during summit meetings. And it seems to be involving the thought of like whether human civil rights is only the thought of like, not necessarily articles of incorporation, or what incorporation is, to maybe the thought of not protected in the way of like what a writ of habeas corpus might present as an issue, whether a patent pending is the idea of whether it's not necessarily a protected issue like around the United States as compared to what a mode is to a kingsmanship, or whether if E equal MC squared is the idea of like the English Parliament in the form of a kingsmanship, or a misappropriation allocation of the Mississippi River presented as maybe instead of a bandwidth and spectrum, but some idea of a circular potentiometer in volume, like a moat is around a castle and a kingsmanship, or what that is as compared to placement in the King James Version Bible or Henry VIII in the way of like even what venue is, and whether or not the parameters present the issue of the 90-degree of waveform as compared to a bandwidth and spectrum that would present maybe the vertical idea of like bandwidth and spectrum in the way of what only absolute values mean to. I mean, if it's ultimately getting to the thought of limitations, boundaries and limitations, or distinguishable difference between what airspace is and VSAT communication, a parameter, psychoacoustics going beyond the parameter is really the thought of like even atmosphere VSAT communications in outer space. Even with that, I mean, it's almost representing, I mean, the reality of like a audio production and special effects that way of like attenuation and processing speed of like customizing waveform. I mean, if it's really ultimately with the idea of controlling beyond the norm of what the atmosphere would be, as a parameter, or psychoacoustics in a way, like mastering something that would probably require, a serious, specialized, considerable amount of time. Having some like reality of controlling something like that is probably some mastery within itself. Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to include that because I wanted to include Diners Club that way. I mean, you know, the thought of like snap food benefits, or the EBT being like a fixture in real estate, as compared to, you know, EBT actually being like a fixture in a commercial venue of living quarters. And, you know, here in Pearland, Texas, you know, I thought I'd include that, you know, not to excuse the thought of, you know, the thought of like maybe what a root habeas corpus might mean only to K television and K radio, or some idea of like summit meetings, or what available information is as a memory, or, you know, some idea of retro, or what living quarters is, as compared to maybe only a perception, whether knowing or not knowing is really what it's always been, or what some idea of maybe that, maybe a projected estimate of maybe only what management might mean, or whether it's still not known or accepted, or the thought of like maybe the alternative in the event of an actual emergency thing, right? So anyway, yeah, I thought I'd include that. It's like going on 56 minutes and like right at 10 seconds right now. But, you know, my thing about that is going to be like, I mean, if it's the Smart for two, thing about that smart car and Mercedes-Benz. I mean, this is a two-seater. I mean, it can seat more, but predominantly, the Lexus. You know, the reason why I'm looking at it for many reasons is because of LexusNexis. Although it's spelled differently, pronounced pretty much the same. It's almost like the thought of the Audi intersecting axis of wood alignment in a parallel universe is as compared to like a World Series or pi r squared, going beyond into the exponential questions of powers and multiplication. And, you know, it seems to be like this Lexus is, got to be with like Diners Club and some idea of like a supplemental security income, and SSI and IS as an international space, as an international superstar, and some superstar intelligence. Yeah, but yeah, you can see me at youtube.com at WadeASVPriddy. That's WadeASVPriddy. And 192, there's like a little bit of issue going on, a little bit there, but yeah, there's in any case, that's where you can see me at with like music videos as a standard. I'm really wanting to get into my original music, and there's some of my original, very, very few, limited at this time right now. Yeah, because I'm trying to present the issue of not feeling, you know, some kind of perception, giving the idea of like not that I have to wait, but, you know, sometimes it's very not funny about that much about it. But yeah, so anyway, like once again, this is the Lexus LFSA compact concept, and yeah, I mean, if it's ultimately getting to the thought of like some like perfect 10-10 vision, and you know, exponential quotients of like of the figure eight, and some ice skating, and some thought of like perfect 10-10 vision of that, you know, it's like really beyond the figure eight, or the thought of like redundant frequency being the RF of 24, or the FR and free, the exact opposite of RF, the FR and the EE, presenting the value of 59 beyond the three simple methods of computation of the symbolic representation between the C and the PTIS on the backside of the US $1. Well, you know, there it is. It's ultimately getting from 58 to 59 with that EE thing about the free thing. And to the vertical part, in my mind, it seems to be like the Diners Club thing about the code blue, likewise in combination, yeah, with the Israeli flag of a 6 point. Again, to, you know, the thing about the US $1, and some quantum and different by design thing about the Japanese structure, and some quantum structure of like formula and computation of a structure that way. But yeah, I thought I'd include that real quick. It's already going on 59 minutes, and pretty close to an hour right now, so I'm gonna go ahead and take a break. Okay, all right, talk to you later.